AITA for expecting sex on a date night with my wife? My wife and I have a great relationship. Last night, however, I learned from my wife that she has been on a sex strike for most of the last month due to some comments I made on our last date night. As background, I arrange a nice date night each month for just the two of us. I plan a dinner somewhere nice, arrange a babysitter, feed our 3 kids dinner, and otherwise handle all of the logistics so that all she has to do is show up. Typically, we will grab drinks somewhere after dinner, often meeting up with friends. Earlier this month, I planned an evening out and we had a fantastic dinner together. After dinner, we met up with a couple we are friends with. However, the wife was tired and wanted to go to bed, so only her husband ended up joining us. Around 11:45 we had to leave to relieve our babysitter. My wife was having fun and didn't want the evening to end, so she invited our friend over for another drink. I told her I was fine with that, but that I was hoping to be in bed by 1 a.m. As background, I do the morning shift with our 3 kids every day and they get up early. My wife promised that we'd be in bed by then. Our friend comes over, we open a bottle of wine, put on some music, and we're all having a good time. 1 o'clock comes around and he gets up to go, but my wife tells us we can't leave, as she is vibing. I stick around for another 10 minutes or so and then decide to call it. My wife tells me she will be up in another 10 minutes. I get ready for bed, which takes about that long, and don't hear her coming, so I go to bed. Around 3 o'clock, I get woken up by her coming into our bedroom. She was drunk at this point and made a lot of noise. I'm now wide awake, and if that happens, it usually takes me a while to go back to sleep, in this case, around 5 o'clock, which was fun when the kids woke up at 6:30. Anyways, at this point, since I'm awake, I try to initiate sex with my wife, who declines and says that she is too tired. I don't pressure her, and she immediately falls asleep. However, I can't sleep now due to being woken up, and sit there and stew for a few hours, mostly frustrated at being woken up but also annoyed at how the evening went overall. My first mistake was sending her a text, while she is asleep, saying that her actions that evening were hurtful and that it felt like I planned this nice evening, only for her to end up spending the later part of it with someone else, and not like that. I am 100% confident they were just listening to music and chatting. The next morning, she came downstairs apologetic. However, I made the mistake of mentioning that her actions made me not really want to plan these extravagant date nights anymore, as she had broken her promise about going to bed at a reasonable hour and then ruined my sleep. Not the first time this has happened on a date night. Then, and this is where I may be the a-hole, I added that this was at least the 4th date night in a row where the night had ended with us not having sex, and that in my mind, a good date night ends in sex. I also added that this one was particularly offensive because it felt like she abandoned me at the end of the night. These comments really upset her, and she said they made her feel like I only appreciate her for sex. She added that date nights should be about having fun and enjoying her company, and that I should assume we won't have sex on date nights. Honestly, I have some sympathy for her perspective about enjoying each other's company being the most important part of a date night, but I also don't think it is unreasonable to feel a little let down after planning a romantic evening, especially since it had become a pattern, and particularly where she effectively chose to do something else rather than have sex with me. So Reddit, what do we think? AITA? Update. Welp, I posted about a month ago about how I was upset my wife invited our friends back over to our house at the end of a date night, and she and the husband ended up hanging out until 3 a.m. after I went to bed at 1 o'clock. A lot of people suggested they were having an affair, and that I was blind to not see it. I swore and swore there was no way, I trust both of them, etc. Turns out, Reddit was right. I was unpacking the car and my wife had left her phone in there, and when I picked it up a text from our friend flashed across saying how he wanted to kiss her and asking her to tell me she needed a night out and should go out to the bar with him. I know it's an invasion of privacy, but we know one another's passcodes, so I opened her phone and checked their text chain. She had been deleting his messages but they were still in the deleted messages folder, and it wasn't great. They've been going on dates during the day when I'm at work, and he has said very suggestive things to her. I confronted my wife about it and she claimed it was purely an emotional affair, that she knew he loved her and enjoyed the attention, and that she had been dealing with severe depression, which is true, and it was nice to have someone to talk to who wasn't me. That she still loved me, it was just very flattering to have the attention. I don't know whether that is all true or not, but I honestly do think she is telling the truth. She pretty much argued it wasn't that big of a deal because they didn't do anything physical outside of him kissing her once, and in her defense the suggestive texts all came from him. So I don't know where we will end up, just reality shattering because I would have never thought either would betray me like this. Update 2. I had a true heart-to-heart with my wife 2 days after I learned of the emotional affair, and we are surprisingly in a really good place now. She apologized profusely, and her description and timeline of events is not as bad as I had feared. It is also consistent with what my former friend, we'll call him R, told me when I interrogated him, and I asked him first, before my wife would have really had a chance to collaborate on a story in the event she wanted to do so. It is also consistent with what my wife's sister has told me. She views me like a brother and is a true ally. As backstory, R and his wife have been going through marital issues for quite some time. We were aware of this. About 6 months ago, things really went into a tailspin, and he started talking to my wife almost as a therapist. I know this sounds weird, but my wife is really good at listening to people's troubles and providing insight. She does this for a bunch of friends, admittedly essentially all women. It started out like once a week or so, and gradually increased from there. By a couple of months ago, they were talking regularly, i.e. several times a week, but still only covering totally PC topics. My wife's sister actually confronted my wife and warned her that she thought R had fallen for her and that she needed to be careful. My wife was convinced that they were just good friends. The night of the infamous date night was actually still in this period. My wife admitted that the optics looked bad, but she really was just having a good time, and was frankly pretty drunk and not thinking clearly. She did say though that after that night she realized that he might have feelings for her, and that in retrospect it was pretty obvious. She felt bad about the date night fiasco, and has been much better in that regard, and she also reduced her alcohol consumption. About 6 weeks ago, we went on a ski trip with 5 other families, including R and his wife. It was a horrible trip for him, and he and his wife fought a lot. One of the nights, he got pretty drunk and asked my wife to meet him at the bar at our hotel, since he needed to talk. While there, he told her that he loved her and wished that he had married her rather than his wife. My wife just told him, "I'm sorry. I had been putting the kids to bed when this went down and came down and inadvertently interrupted them right after they said this. I do remember some weird vibes in retrospect." My wife admitted she should have told me right then and there, but that she didn't want to blow up the trip for the whole friend group, as if she told me she was worried that I might make a scene. He then didn't say anything problematic for another week or two, and she chalked it up to him just being really drunk and really sad, and hoped things could just go back to normal. Unfortunately, R's marriage took a turn for the worse about a month ago, and it seems pretty clear that they are getting divorced. My wife, who suffers from severe depression, also went into a depressive period around this time, in large part due to some familial issues. This was timed very poorly, as I recently launched a new division at my company and have been working 60-hour week for the last 3 months or so. Both R and my wife felt isolated and lonely, and R started calling my wife virtually every day. They also started grabbing lunch once or twice a week. I guess he would meet her for lunch on his lunch break. The vast majority of their interaction was them talking about life, but he started saying inappropriate things in person like, "You're the most beautiful woman I know," or "You're gorgeous." He also started drinking heavily, and he would send suggestive texts when drinking, which my wife claims she would just ignore. The time he kissed her I was actually home. The 3 of us had been hanging out and I went to use the restroom. I asked her why she didn't tell me or shut things down, and she admitted it was a mixture of not wanting to blow up our friend group plus her enjoying the attention and compliments, even if she had no interest in the guy. She chuckled a little bit when I asked if she had slept with him. For reference, R is probably 150+ pounds overweight, which is one of the major strains in his marriage, whereas my wife is a true 10/10. Basically, she was depressed, needed someone to talk to, and since I was so busy with work, she found that emotional support elsewhere. She admits that it was really wrong, and has agreed to take a bunch of actions to prevent this in the future. For me, I still struggle with why she would do some of this, e.g. if he texts that you should come over and join him in the shower, and you respond, "Why don't we do a lunch date instead?" From my view, that is pouring gasoline on a fire, by showing you still want to meet with him, whereas she thought she was steering things away from problematic situations. Something shady can't happen in a public setting. She said he came by the house a couple of times during the day, including once when our son was home with her, but that she really tried to steer things to public settings once she knew he loved her. It also does hurt a bit that in one of the texts are asked if they could do a lunch date and she says no, my husband, me, is working from home today, with a sad face. But we're going to make it work. We are going to do couples therapy and she wants to do individual therapy, and she also started working part-time to keep her busy on something else. We can't go fully non-contact with R, but now all communication has to include me. I am also going to work on being more emotionally present, even when working a ton, and I told her that if she is having a depressive episode and needs to talk to someone, she can always call me. Her mental well-being is more important than my work. She was afraid to call during the day since I am very busy and would call her instead. I also promised to work on being happier and more positive. I am usually a very cheerful person, which is something she loved about me, but I had been pretty grumpy and miserable over the last few months due to my job being crazy. So a little blame does rest with me. I'm certainly not perfect, although I'd never cheat on my partner. I know most of you will probably roll your eyes and say I'm being a pushover, but none of you know how amazing my wife is. She has a magnetic personality and is the life of a party. She is also one of the brilliant people I have ever met. She's a great mom, and my best friend. And finally, she's a bombshell. When she is dolled up, most heads turn when she enters a room. If you've ever seen Wedding Crashers, she is, in both personality and appearance, eerily similar to Isla Fisher's character, although she is better looking than Isla. I honestly can't blame her for falling for her, but I can blame him, and call him a piece of shit, for acting on it. Dumb? Maybe. But my wife is too amazing to let go over this without a fight, especially when she seems committed to fixing things, and actually apologetic, including for getting defensive the night I discovered it. I'll do an update in a few months. Hopefully things will be positive. Update 3. As a recap, I made an AITA post about me being upset at my wife inviting for my best friend over on a date night earlier this year. A majority of the responders replied that they were likely having an affair. I defended my wife and former best friend, and then a month later I discovered Reddit was right, and they were indeed having an affair, albeit an emotional one. After my last few posts gained some traction, I promised to provide an update in a few months. The last few months have been a bit of a roller coaster, but I'm happy to report that my wife and I are in a really good place at the moment and fully reconciled. There have been some wild moments though since Discovery Day. Going non-contact with my former best friend, Rick, only to have him call my wife several months later, in the middle of a game night with friends, which was awkward, sobbing in his car and threatening to kill himself. I told her I was fine if she were to talk to him that night, since we were legitimately concerned he might off himself, and although, fug him, he was my former best friend and I don't want him to die, but they spoke for like 2 hours that night and then he started texting her constantly, and called like 5 times the next day, forcing us to go non-contact with him again. Running into Rick at a group event and him acting incredibly emo and moody, he sat in a corner and drank an entire bottle of whiskey out of an oversized Yeti. Rick approaching me at said event and saying that he was on the verge of telling everyone about the affair because he just wants to burn everything down. My wife and I were able to convince him not to do so. Learning that Rick had asked my wife to leave me, she said no, and he had told her he would wait however long she needed, even 15 years, so that they could be together. Rick becoming obsessed with my wife's sister, who is very similar to my wife. They now go out for drinks several times a week and talk daily. My wife is convinced he is now in love with her. Awkwardly, my sister-in-law is separated but still lives with her soon-to-be ex-husband. Rick is still married, but divorce is seemingly imminent. In all this chaos, however, my wife and I have been doing very well. The shock of the affair forced us to work through our issues and we now communicate about as well as one could hope for, and have solved for most of the issues that led her to look outside our marriage for emotional support. I'd love to be able to go back in time and prevent the affair, and I don't know if I'll trust anyone fully anymore, but in many ways it improved our relationship, which is a very strange thing to say.